Hey everyone, today we are taking a look at the Neptunia series' first Xbox game. It's Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this game before if you follow the Nep series. It was previously released on the PS4, PS5, PC, and recently on the Nintendo Switch. Now we have it on Xbox, specifically the Xbox One and Series X and S. I reviewed the PS5 version and Nintendo Switch port on the channel before, and that's what I'll compare the Xbox version to, and specifically I'm running it on an Xbox Series X. And once again, thank you to Idea Factory for providing me with the game. I've already done 2 reviews on this game, so what I'll do is take the footage from either my PS5 or Switch review that talks about the game mechanics and the story and stuff like that, and insert it here. That way you can get the info without having to watch the other videos if you don't want to do that. And if you just want the info on specific Xbox port stuff, which is mainly graphics, skip to the time shown on screen or check the chapters to go to that section. So here it is. The game takes place within the same dimension as the main storyline. Sometimes Neptunia spin-offs are in their own little universe or dimension, but that's not the case here. While the game will explain the basics of the world to the player, Sisters vs. Sisters is best enjoyed if you've already played at least a previous game or watched the anime. I'm going to assume that most of you know at least the basics of the series, but if not, the quick crash course is that 4 goddesses represent 4 brands of consoles. Neptune is Sega, Noir is Sony, Blonde is Nintendo, and Vert is Microsoft. So they're personifications of the brands, though it used to be that they represented specific consoles, specifically the Sega Neptune, PlayStation 3, Wii, and then the Xbox 360. But over time, it made more sense to make them represent the brands themselves. So that's kind of what you have now. And then the goddesses' little sisters represent handheld consoles of their respective brands. Each goddess rules over their own land, and they have people that worship them. The game takes place after Neptunia V2, and this time round the theme is handheld consoles versus smartphones. Though I think a better way to describe it is actually that this game parodies and comments on the rise of mobile gaming and how it affected traditional console gaming without, necessarily just branding one side as good and the other as bad. I think it's very well done. The story has a tone that's similar to the first Neptunia PS3 game. It's quite self-aware without randomly breaking the fourth wall for no reason like some of the later games did. The story in Sisters vs. Sisters focuses on Nepgear and the other CPU candidates, Uni, ROM, and RAM, even though the regular goddesses aren't by any means in the background. The plot goes kind of like this. Neptune, Noir, Vert, and Blonde go to the PC continent in order to investigate an SOS signal. While they are gone, Nepgear and co. investigate a horde of monsters that just suddenly appeared outside of Planetoon. After entering a cave, they find a research facility they weren't aware of. Inside, they find a capsule with a girl sleeping in it, and she looks very much like a goddess herself. After she awakens, she seems to recognize Nepgear, but she still ends up trapping the CPU candidates in the capsule, which causes them to fall into a slumber. After the screen fades to black, we hear voices and the CPU candidates are woken up. It turns out they were in there for 2 years and a lot has changed in their absence. Game industry is in turmoil as monster outbreaks called trendy outbreaks have been ravaging the nations. Planetoon was especially affected because not only did they not have their goddess candidate for 2 years, but Neptune also went missing on her trip to the PC continent, which experienced a great calamity, leaving them without a goddess for that entire time. On top of that, the nations find themselves with low amounts of shares, which has been taken away by a new device called the R-Phone. Though, interestingly enough, I think it's in Japanese they call it the Magiphone, not the R-Phone, but anyways. And now many people spend tons of time on those devices, becoming addicted to social media and gacha games. I think the story is quite well done. It manages to touch on a lot of current events, and thankfully it doesn't go down the consoles good, smartphones bad sort of route. In fact, Nepgear and co. being out of touch with the newest tech and related social trends is often brought up. And then there's also Neptune's disappearance, which actually puts a more serious tone on everything. Though it still has there's a lighthearted atmosphere still to many of the conversations. That's not gone. Another thing I was worried about was how close the plot sounded to Mark II and Rebirth 2 when the game was first announced. But to be perfectly honest, the game's stories don't really feel similar at all. In Mark II and Rebirth 2, Nepgear struggled quite a bit in order to become more confident, and in Sisters vs. Sisters, she spends a day cooped up in her room after finding out her sister's missing, but then she promptly gets going again and travels to the other nations to convince the other goddesses to assist her and the nation of Planetoon. So thankfully, that bit of character development just didn't go, missing. She's a more mature person in this game than she was in the beginning of Mark II and Rebirth 2. In addition, there's some new characters in the mix, like Maho and Anri. Maho is a hyperactive girl who loves smartphones and new tech. Often she's the one joking how the goddess candidates are out of touch with, not knowing about social media things and how to use smartphones and stuff like that. It wouldn't be a NEP game if someone didn't have amnesia, and this time round, Maho is the one who doesn't have any memories. She, along with Anri, a quiet software engineer, are refugees from the PC continent. Anri, by the way, has a very stealthy fanservice outfit. You basically never see it in the game because, just with how much of the sprite you see in the game. But it's very noticeable in the official art when you see the full sprite. In terms of official maker characters, there's two, Higurashi and Shanghai Alice. Higurashi is named after the horror franchise of the same name and shares her appearance, weapon, and basic personality with Rena. Shanghai Alice is the character representing the ever-popular Touhou series. Now, I don't know anything about that series, so obviously the references have just been, they've been going over my head the entire time. So yeah, sorry I can't, comment more on that. Gameplay-wise, it's both a bit familiar and a bit new. Let's take a look at how NEP games usually work. You run around a dungeon and come into contact with enemies to initiate a fight. Once you're fighting, you're in a circle, which is the battlefield, and the fighting is done in a turn-based fashion with regular and special attacks. And you can use items, normal JRPG stuff. In Sisters vs. Sisters, a lot of this still rings true, but the actual fighting has been adapted into a real-time format. It's AP-based, but there's still like these combo paths that you had previously, where you can have like various powerful, fast, and armor break attacks. And you can also jump between the different paths of combos there. One big difference, though, is that now you can run around the entire, battlefield, you call it. So it's not just a small radius that each character can move around in. You also assign special attacks to triangle, and then triangle up and triangle down. Obviously, that's done so you don't have to go into a menu to do special attacks. That being said, you still need to go into the menu to use items, for example. So yeah, there's times where that's unavoidable. Though it is worth mentioning that sometimes, when you're in battle, the characters that you don't control will ask you if it's okay to use items, for example, in order to heal. And if you confirm, then they use the item, as you may imagine. You can also block attacks, which is really something I should learn doing. Throughout this video, you'll see me get hit all the time by the enemy when I should really be blocking. I guess I'm just not used to block attacks in Neptunia games, but anyways. You can switch between 3 characters. I always think that's an awkward number for this series since there's 4 goddesses and 4 CPU candidates. So I think it really should be 4, but that's how it is. In battle, you want to switch characters whenever you can because chaining attacks makes your damage multiplier go up. You can see how it goes from 1 to, times 1.1, 1.2, and so on. A symbol will come up on the screen to indicate that you can actually chain attacks. Every party member gains experience from fights, even when for story reasons they temporarily leave or become unavailable. You'll see them periodically level up even if they aren't present. I like that because it makes character leveling simple, and it's also easy to swap characters back and forth without having to get a lower level character up to speed. Though, if you haven't used them in a while, you probably have to buy them some new weapons. As with other NEP games, you navigate dungeons in a similar way as you do before, though we see some interesting enhancements, changes, and additions. What's the same is the general game flow. Dungeons have multiple floors with enemies running about, and items/treasures laying around which you can collect. In order to advance in the story, you usually have to go to a particular event spot in the dungeon for the story to continue. One thing you'll notice is how all the dungeons are all new. Some look quite good, others are maybe a little bit bland, like the underground ones, but overall it's surprisingly good. While not new to the series, save points are strewn throughout the dungeons, but now there's a noticeable amount more of them and they allow you to do a few things like fast travel between spots in the dungeon or go back to the world map. A convenient change. The mechanics of initiating a fight are noticeably simplified. While hitting enemies from behind still gives you an advantage, there now never is a point where the enemies get an advantage. In the past, you'd be extra vulnerable while trying to hit them, or if your back was turned to them and they get to you first. But that doesn't matter in Sisters vs. Sisters. If that ends up happening, the fight just starts in a normal, neutral way. Also new are some puzzle elements. I was slightly surprised actually. At first I thought it was just some doors you have to, that you have to open by finding their switches that are hidden in other rooms or whatever. But after several hours of playing in dungeons that looked either wooded or, or looked like a cave or a cave with a slightly different color, there was one sci-fi looking dungeon that suddenly had blocks that you had to move to a certain spot in order to, open a path up. Now, I don't mind that, but these so-called puzzles are pretty simple. If you've ever played a Zelda game, this will be a bit too easy to say the least. I mean, you wouldn't even put this in a tutorial, to be honest. But hey, it's a bit different to what we see normally in an EP game, so maybe they can work on that in the future. Something with these new dungeons is that they can be a bit repetitive. I'm pretty sure the dungeons were made from, modules. And it does trick you into thinking you're walking in circles sometimes. But then I realize, oh wait, that's just another bit of the dungeon that just happens to look the same. On the other hand, there's places like Planetoon that have a sci-fi urban appearance that look really quite nice. Sure, there's no cars and, not that many people, but there's actually a lot of the city you can run around in, with different districts being available to explore. I think that does a lot for world building, something a lot of the past Neptunia games didn't do that good of a job of. Sometimes we only had background illustrations in cutscenes to go by when it comes to, trying to see what the areas looked like. V2 and V2R had some dungeons that sort of had this urban look to them, but now there's so many more areas that you can go to. And each district has its own visual identity, which I think is really good. There's even buildings with several floors, and Planet Tower has a great view with several buildings being recognizable from high up. Overall, it does a lot to make the world feel more real. Planetoon serves as a home base where you can heal up without using items, and you can buy items, weapons, and accessories. Several chapters into the game, you'll also get access to the arena, which is a way to get items and also level up. There's also a training mode that allows you to fight already fought opponents if you want to get more familiar with how they fight. There's also Neptunia Tower, where you can try and reach the 100th floor, with each 10 floors having a boss. Side quests still exist in Sisters vs. Sisters, except that instead of going to the guild, you have to go to Chirper. We've seen Chirper in many Neptunia games, but I think this is the best iteration yet. You get to see what people post in an app rather than just, speech bubbles spread around the map. So that's a way more realistic way of showing that. And there's also tabs, or rather there is a tab showing side quests that you can do. And there's another tab that shows you active and also completed tasks, or quests rather. You've got the usual quests that where they ask you to defeat certain monsters and gather specific items, but you can also find missing people. Not really any different than just going to an event spot, but, it is technically different. A really nice addition to the game is that there are now little quest icons on the dungeons showing you where to go in order to complete your quests. So you don't have to be like, oh, which monsters and which quests or whatever. If there's a little logo there, it'll you can hover over it and it even shows you which monsters you're trying to hunt down. Thank you very much, past me. Now let's continue on. On the Series X, Sisters vs. Sisters looks and plays the same as it does on the PS5. I don't notice any performance differences at all. I thought I saw some graphical problems on the Xbox version, but that turns out to also exist on the PS5. For example, when walking around in Planetoon, on some of the tile surfaces, there's blocky effects going on there with the reflections that happen at a certain distance, but that turns out to exist in all versions. So yeah, overall, that's great that it's equal to the PS5 version. So for those who have both the PS5 and Series X and are wondering which version to get, the answer is it doesn't matter, whatever you prefer. That is, except if you want the swimsuit DLC. Both physical and digital Xbox versions include it, while it's a digital deluxe edition exclusive everywhere else. When you consider what the game looks like versus what the PS5 and Xbox Series X are capable of, I still think that both versions should run at 60 FPS consistently. The PC version is still king at that at this point. In hindsight, it actually is impressive that the game runs as well as it does on the Switch, to be honest, but yeah. Let's talk about graphics in a bit more detail. Technically, what I'm showing will apply to both the Series X and PS5 versions, though what you're seeing right now is the Xbox game. This section will basically be me describing some bits about the graphics for those who haven't seen the other Sisters vs. Sisters reviews, while at the same time comparing the Xbox and PlayStation versions to the other ports when appropriate. On the Xbox Series X, main gameplay is 30 FPS. That applies to running around in dungeons, battling, and pretty much everything three-dimensional. In the menus and cutscenes, you'll see the game reach 60 FPS, you know, the frame rate that the entire game should run at in the first place. The live 2D bits are the best they've ever been in the series. There's more movement, more poses, and overall more life to everything. We haven't seen a good upgrade in that department in a while, if ever, so that's a welcome sight. Believe it or not, there are differences between battles on the PlayStation, Xbox, PC versus how they are on the Switch. On the more powerful consoles / on the PC, you fight in the same bit of dungeon you and the enemy come into contact. Though interestingly, you'll notice stuff in the background like the crates disappear when when battle starts, probably for performance reasons. I thought that was kind of funny. On the Switch, it goes to a separate battle stage, probably because the Switch can't handle doing it the way the other systems can, lack of power. Because of this, there are actually winning animations and poses that you'll see on the Switch, basically to mask the transition between the battle stage and the dungeon. That's an interesting little fact there. Strangely, running animations seem to be the same for all characters. I didn't notice at first because you're busy being annoyed at how the other party members keep running in front of you all the time. Hopefully that'll be fixed for Game Maker Revolution. Why not just have unique running animations for every character? I find it a bit unfortunate that transformation sequences are cut short in this game. I'd rather have them exist and be skippable if you don't want to watch them, instead of just being basically almost absent. Things like special effects and special attacks look pretty good. I do like that Sisters vs. Sisters has new dungeons for this game, but they are quite repetitive. You can tell that everything is assembled in a modular way, so you get repeating parts in the dungeon. It's confusing because you sometimes don't quite know if you've been there before or not, plus it's just needless visual repetition. Speaking of environments and dungeons, for a Neptunia game, they do look quite good, except for the previously mentioned modular repetition, though things can be a little bit inconsistent. Here's an example. One of the most noticeable improvements can be found in the more urban environments. The various floor surfaces often have nice lighting and reflections that really makes the surface look distinct and realistic. But at the same time, something like asphalt looks completely flat and dull. This can be true with entire dungeons even. The dark and gloomy dungeons, the ones that are underground, those really just don't look great, to be honest. Hopefully that's something that can be a bit more refined in the next game there, Game Maker Revolution, since that is based on Sisters vs. Sisters. Let's bring up a few non-graphic related things, because there are some. Some of you may know that some dialogue had been altered in the past, in the original releases there. Certain lines and words were toned down a bit due to an error of not listing language as a descriptor on the ESRB rating thing. The Xbox version also has the altered text and dialogue. Another thing is that the Switch version has Anri and Maho as exclusive playable characters, so you can't have them in your party on the PC, Xbox, or PlayStation versions. I think that's particularly terrible. Why would you make stuff like that exclusive? The Xbox version does include the swimsuit DLC, while with the others, it's exclusive to the Digital Deluxe Edition. The fact that you get shafted when buying the physical or even the expensive limited edition, but not being able to get the swimsuit DLC, I think is ridiculous. But yeah, on the Xbox, it doesn't matter which version you get, the physical or digital, it's included. For some reason, the GOG version doesn't have it available either, actually. I checked all my press emails and the GOG page, but I can't find anything, so that's another thing that isn't great. But yeah, that's basically the Xbox version of Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters. Nice to see Nep on the Xbox after all these years. Hopefully that's something they can continue with future games, despite various complaints. I do think the story is a highlight, and it's back to its former heights in terms of satire and commentary on today's video game industry. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.